So, welcome everyone. Welcome, Gavin. How are you today?
I'm better. I'm good. I'm recovered. Thank you for asking, sir. How are you?
Well, excellent actually. I have some back problems, but that wouldn't. That's not something that's going to be a problem during this episode. I'm talking in episodes already. It's a bit strange because this all started as the two of us just chatting, and somebody's mentioning we should record this, and now we're doing it for the third time, and I'm calling it an episode.
It's true. And we've got, people are coming saying, I'd like to be on your episode soon. I've got some messages too. And we had Matt Pittman a couple of weeks ago come in. And I'm sorry that I've had to cancel twice. I had the dengue fever, knocked me clean out, but I'm back now, which is good. I felt very guilty about all the people who were coming along and couldn't attend. So yeah, it's good. I always look forward to this meeting. I think it's great.
Yeah, and today we're gonna talk about turning oops into aha. That was our title. Um,
Yeah.
so we're gonna dive into some stories or strategies actually to to turn these. Well, a lot of people talk about failure and mistakes, but I actually like to avoid those words. How is that on your end, Gavin?
Um, all I'll say to start the conversation is this. Walt Disney Walt Disney was fired from his job in a newspaper for not being creative enough. He was sacked, right? And he went into another business after that, and he failed financially. But he didn't stop there. He continued, and obviously now he's a frozen human waiting to be brought back to life from cryogenesis. But, he failed so many times. Look at Thomas Edison. Look at Mr. Dyson, the man who invented the Dyson vacuum cleaner.
Yeah,
1,500 different
1500. Yeah,
vacuum cleaners until he got the right one. So actually, like you say, whatever we call it, failure, we call it mistakes. These are things that we actually should celebrate. And if you're seeing things go wrong in your classroom, things are going wrong in your household, as in your children are making mistakes, or even you, or failing sometimes, that's actually something you should be celebrating. That's something to jump on and say, we're actually making progress here.
yeah. I like to use this one liner, and I'm just gonna throw it at you. For me, the goal is not to eliminate mistakes or failure. It's to build learners who actually know how to deal with them, and
Mm.
that's it. Um, so I think we are quite like-minded on stuff like this. So
But there's a science behind this too, So,
exactly.
when it comes to the brain and how the brain operates, if children are continuously getting everything right, and you're sending home 10 out of 10, 100% grade A's, everything's correct. We actually haven't put them in an environment which is, it allows our children to grow. And so what happens when their children make mistakes or fail or it goes wrong is a certain part of their brain kicks in. And that part of their brain that kicks in allows them to make these synaptic connections in their brain that bring big picture ideas together. And it's only then when that happens. He says, hang on a minute. This didn't go right. Something went horribly wrong here. I need to think outside the box. And so they start going into old neural pathways to try to make connections with other things they've done, other ideas they've had, other things they've created to work around the problem and solve it. And so you have it actually allows you to access what's called deep learning. That's when it happens. When things go horribly wrong, you grasp for any way around the issue and you go back into your hippocampus, short-term memory, long-term memory to try to solve the problem. So if mistakes are not happening in your classroom, we've got an issue. We've actually got a problem there.
Yeah. A friend of mine, Harold Backering, who is a neurosurgeon, not a neurosurgeon. I'm sorry, he studies the brain. I always pronounce it wrong.
Neuroscientist.
And neuroscientist. He did a research on this, and what he did was he had people. He put them in front of a screen, and on that screen they could operate a spotlight. So the screen was fully black, besides a white spotlight. And the goal
Okay.
was to find symbols on the screen and to memorize these symbols. So they could operate the spotlight and they would find the symbol. And after, I don't know how long, I think 4 or 5 seconds, the
Yep.
symbol would disappear and they had to memorize it. And then they would search for the next one and search for the next one and search for the next one.
Ah,
And with that, they would have a list of, at the end, they would have memorized a lot of these symbols. And then he had a second group who almost had the same test. They would also get that same screen. They would also have that spotlight, and they would also have to find those symbols and memorize them. But the second group wasn't controlling the spotlight. They
ah,
were supposed to follow the spotlight. So they weren't discovering on their own. Somebody was leading them into these
yeah.
discoveries. Well, the second group scored 20% less on memorizing the images.
I see.
So there was a huge difference between the people who actually had the experience, tried to find, failed finding, and found, who controlled
Yeah.
the process themselves, uh, in comparison with the people who were just following the process alone and
Mm.
waiting for the spotlight to find the symbol. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's so interesting. And when you talk, there's so much talk now around, soft skills, essential skills, and then, the future focused skills that everyone's looking for. We talk about resilience, determination, passion, perspective, understanding. All of these things are skills, but a lot of them can't be taught. This is the big issue that we're facing, that you can't teach a child to be confident. You can't say, hello, guys, today we're going to have a lesson on confidence. We're going to read this piece of text. Now we're going to do a little quiz. Now, everyone, you're now confident. Off you go. Be confident, guys. It's not how it works. And so what you find is that a lot of these skills are embedded in what we call experimentation. And I think this is a really nice part of science and child psychology where it comes together, because failure is about being in, or mistakes, or whatever you want to call it, is about being in an environment where you feel safe enough to be able to try new things, but also it's something that's promoted as success. So when those two things are in parallel, like this is a space where you can try new things and you're safe enough to do that. You won't be ridiculed. You won't be humiliated. You won't be graded on that. And number two, when you do make mistakes, it's growth mindset. So we're all going to learn from that. But I think the most important part of this conversation around aha moments is that when children feel safe, it's called the circle of safety. You've never heard of this before. But if they're at home or they're at school and they feel that in this environment, I am safe, I'm connected, I'm safe in here, nothing can harm me in here, my teacher's not going to humiliate me, no one's going to laugh at me, blah, 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 blah. And what they will do is they will go out and experiment, knowing full well if it goes wrong, they can fall back, and there's two beautiful hands to catch them, this circle of safety, at home and at school. And so even when we talk about mistakes or failure or things going wrong and having a growth mindset, we have to start with the absolute basics. And that is, there is going to be no experimentation in your room, in your house, with your children. There's going to be nothing unless they feel safe enough to be able to do that. And so you have to start from ground zero, and that is make your children feel safe. Make sure you've connected with them before you try any of these things. And if you do that correctly, then your children will experiment all day long. And then those skills we want, the essential skills, the soft skills, the future focus skills, they will just grow organically, because when we make mistakes, we develop resilience, persistence, determination, confidence, communication. All these things come organically and naturally.
Yeah, you know what, Gavin? I always like to say, like, we have to create an environment in which the students or the children at home want to walk in front of us instead of following us.
Yeah.
And that's actually what I'm seeing in education. We've got ourselves into the system that we interpreting the word safe in the wrong way. We're making it so safe that kids don't dare to walk in front of us, and we don't give them the position to walk in front of us anymore. We say, follow me, do exactly as I do, and then it will be safe and you will learn this. But it's actually the opposite way around, because if you're constantly following somebody, you belong to those people who are just watching the spotlight finding something instead of having the experience yourself. And with the experience also comes internalization of the process, assessing to whatever comes to mind, but also to ever what bumps in front of you. So I think it's really about turning that around in your classrooms, but also at home. Like, give them the environment in which they, of course, feel safe, but safe enough to start acting, to start doing, to start testing, to start experimenting. And then, of course, we are there. When I was still working at Agra, I would always say to my staff, we are there to make sure that we don't have to send anybody to the hospital. But a little risk on a bandage is no problem at all, because that means they are actually daring to experiment. They're actually daring to learn, daring to develop themselves. And so I think
And
that's a big difference.
I think, look, there's a big difference between freedom and freedom within limits.
Absolutely.
So you have, I mean, there's a misconception in Montessori that it's just free for all and do whatever you want. It's actually not the case. In fact, it's really, really, really carefully planned in the background. But the thing that's planned is not what everyone's going to do, because that's not what we do. You plan the environment in the room, in the space that they're going to be in, culture, and the values that are embedded, and the materials and the space all together, so that people feel safe enough to go into that space and do what they think is best. And things will go wrong sometimes. They'll drop something on the floor, or they'll trip over, or whatever. There'll be an argument, but that's where learning comes. That's where learning comes when it goes, let's call it wrong, but I think it's right.
Yeah, and what I actually see a lot in let's call it more traditional forms of education, or people who are stuck in making sure that everything has to be safe. And when something goes wrong, they immediately try to hide it. But what you actually need to do is gather everybody and talk about what happened here. How do we analyze this? What do we learn from this? How can we make this a learning experience for everybody, and not just the one person who stumbled onto something, or we dropped the paint, or without blaming anybody, but celebrating the success that we actually have something to reflect on, to have something to learn from. That's what I so often. Of course, I also know where it's coming from. I see a lot of teachers who feel rushed by the curriculum. They have to finish a certain paragraph today. And by finishing that, they actually miss the biggest learning moments. And of course, they try to explain the full paragraph. But that you succeeded in explaining a full paragraph doesn't mean that anybody knows it, like a year from now, or a half a year from now, or even better, that somebody can apply it. And for me, that's why you have to stop, you have to reflect, you have to analyze together, because then you are applying what you actually want to bring across. And that's on a higher level, and that makes brain connections for life.
Yeah, actually, we know this from neuroscience. So I find this really fascinating. I was doing a talk about this a couple of nights ago in Adelaide. We find it really fascinating. The worst fear, the absolute worst fear for a teacher, or for a parent, is you've planned this lesson, you've got it all down, you've got your materials ready, you've really done your stuff, you've done your research, and you're really excited, and you teach it. And there's disengagement in your class. The worst fear is they're bored, and you can see they're bored, but you keep going. You keep going because you've put so much effort into planning it, so you keep on this route of teaching. And then you try your best, and then you say, look, guys, I really want you to try to remember this. I'm giving you a task for your homework, or there's a project you're going to do, whatever your objectives are. And on Friday, we're going to have a little quiz, and we're going to see how you did, and try to remember everything I said, right? And the fear is that comes to Friday, and you look at whatever assessment you're doing, and they remember nothing. They've taken in absolutely zero. That's your fear. Now, the multiple reasons why that can be the case. You've pitched it wrong. You've got the cognitive load incorrect. It's too hard, it's too easy, it's too boring. You weren't inspiring. There's all these things at play. But there's actually some fundamentals of the brain which will guarantee that the children will go home and consider what you've said or what you've taught and move it into long-term memory. There's some fundamentals, some absolute deal breakers there. One of them is risk. So your brain has one objective, and that is to keep you alive as long as humanly possible. That's it. There's nothing else it needs to do. It learns to keep you alive. It does everything it does just to keep you alive. That is its job. Okay, that's why it learns, because learning is good for your environment. But if there is risk embedded in your lesson, risk is really important for your brain. It does not want risk. It wants to make sure it knows where all the risks are, because it doesn't want you to fall off a cliff or walk into the street or fall down a manhole. So a really simple, hard rule for teachers is, if you want your students to remember what you've taught, right, for whatever reason it is that you want, you just need to have some risk inside the lesson. Now, the risk doesn't need to be so severe that they might die. I'm not talking about that kind of risk.
You don't have to invite a lion.
Nah, you don't have to invite a lion into your classroom. You might just give them some choice. You can choose who you work with, right? That just could be just that. Okay, guys, off you go to do your work on butterflies. You can choose who you work with. Now, straight away, there's risk, because I'm like, well, I want to work with Rob, but Rob is so popular. Like, if I ask him, then he might say no, go away, you're a loser. But he might say yes. And so it's really small in our minds, but it's actually really big in our children's minds. And that simple choice, you can choose where you sit. You can choose what you show me in 20 minutes' time. Show me, you'll represent your work in any way you wish. You choose it. So the tiniest little bit of risk means that later on that night, when they go to sleep, their brain says, shall I keep this information or dissolve it? And because there was risk, and risk is linked directly to staying alive, the brain says, better keep it. And in that process of keeping it, they keep your learning at the same time. So your butterfly lesson moves into the hippocampus. And so there's 4 of these fundamentals that are almost guaranteed for the brain to say, all right, shift it into long-term memory. I'm never going to forget that again. And we all know that. If you've ever had to make a really big decision, right or wrong, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like, you don't forget that moment. And similarly, you won't forget the learning that's tied to that.
And this reminds me of an experience we had in Denmark with a school that I'm working with there. And in this primary school, the kids on Fridays, full Fridays, every week, they were allowed to work on their own personal projects. And I don't know exactly the time frame. I think they were allowed to work on a project for like 5 or 6 weeks in a row. And then they had to come up with a product at the end and show the product to the other kids to learn from their experience as well. And so these kids were working beautifully. It was actually such a fun experience. I was working with the staff for a while, and I came in on this Friday morning, and the staff was actually sitting in the teacher's lounge when I came in. And I said, what are you all doing? Why aren't you out there with the kids? And they said, well, the kids send us here. They don't need us at the moment. So now we're walking along the classrooms. They had about 6 different classrooms there. So now every 10 minutes, one of them would get up and walk along all the classrooms. And they would show the kids, like, guys, we trust you. You're working on your own. And then, of course, they would sit in the classrooms again to observe them as well, because, of course, you can't create so much distance for a full time. But they were showing, we trust you. You want to work on your own? And at this particular day, one student all of a sudden wasn't working like he was working the weeks before. He was actually escaping the classroom. He went outside, started to play basketball and stuff like that. And one of the teachers came up to one of my colleagues, which helps me to guide the school. And he says, we don't know what's wrong with the boy. He was working so hard and he was always talking about his project. And now all of a sudden, since the day, it looks like he froze, because that's also the fear of a lot of people. When we give these kids the space to explore, what if they freeze and how do we act? So, and what we always tell, what we help our teachers with, the teachers that we guide us, we always say, okay, when children act strange, it doesn't matter, positive or negative, you sit down and observe. And what you start observing is, what's his level of autonomy and is he showing that? What's his level of competence and is he showing that? And what's his level of relatedness and is he showing that? And if you analyze in the proper way, you can pinpoint that one of them is probably off. at the moment, you know?
Yeah.
And in this case, this boy was really acting up. And if they would say, go inside and do your project, uh, um, he would be very rude. And normally he wouldn't be rude. So at his relatedness, there was this issue. But of course, that doesn't happen out of the blue. It, it's triggered by something. So we asked what happened. Uh, we asked the teachers, like, okay, now you observe that he has a problem on relatedness because you say, listen, you're playing basketball while you should be working inside, and he then opens his mouth and he expresses himself not in a pleasant way. But that, of course, is not the problem. That's the result of a problem. So let's
Yeah.
go back in time. Since when is he doing this? And then we found out that one of the teachers in the morning told all the students, next week, you're all going to present your project in front of the full class.
Right.
And since then, he was acting up. So what does that mean? That means probably that he doesn't feel that he has enough competences to do that presentation next week.
Yeah.
So we advised the teacher, let's go in there and ask if this is really the reason. If the reason is, so he came back to us and says, yes, that's the reason. He doesn't want to do the presentation. And we said, okay, so how are you going to solve this? And he said, yeah, but I told the full class, you have to do a presentation. And we said, okay, and with that, you put him in his panic zone, not in his threat zone anymore. He's not growing anymore.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Okay, so who has to change something now? You as a teacher or the student? Because he can't get himself out of his panic zone.
Oh, yeah. That's not his problem.
That's not his problem. We've done that. So you
We
have to go
caused that.
back in. Yeah, you have to go back in and you have to tell him, listen, I made a stupid announcement this morning.
Yeah.
You are not going to do a presentation next week in front of the full class. You don't have to. Because if I keep that up, that means I put you in your panic zone for the full week. That means you are going to be very annoying. I'm going to be annoyed about that. And then we're going to focus on on that result instead of on the actual problem that I haven't helped you to feel capable enough to stand in front of class and do a presentation.
Yeah.
And the whole and it was a huge misunderstanding because the boy was working on a product, and he was in his mind, he would put the product out, and people would start asking him questions about the product. Now he felt that the teacher surprised him and said, you have to do a presentation. So he was thinking PowerPoint, 15 slides, and whoa, that's overwhelming. I want to finish my project for next week. I want to have that product out there. So it was something really simple that triggered it. But in let's be honest, in most educational settings, we start solving the problem instead of looking for where did it arise and what do we need to do there. So we would say this boy is rude, stand in the hallway. I want to talk to your parents after school because you are rude. But the problem was actually with the teacher.
That's right. And it's about perspective, like, understanding your students, knowing what will happen and what their reactions will be under certain scenarios. I mean, like if you have any children in your class with neurodivergent, if you have any children with autism, ADD, ADHD, any of those things, what's the one thing you don't do? You don't spring things on them. You don't change things last minute. And I had this amazing teacher at my school. He was called Toby when I was school principal. And so what he would do, there's quite a couple of neurodivergent children in his class, but it benefited everyone in actual fact. It benefited him as well. So in the morning, he'd come early, of course. He was a really dedicated teacher. He'd have a little whiteboard that he would prop up by the classroom door. And on there, he would write down the itinerary for the whole day. So it's like, 8:45 till 9 o'clock, it's a warm-up. We're going to come into class, choose your seats, sit with your partner, get your diary out, write down what's happening today. 9 o'clock, we're going to go into circle time for 15 minutes, 9:15 till 10 o'clock, we're going to do mathematics, whatever it was. And it was all laid out right there. So you walk in the door and the kids could see this is what's happening today. And suddenly they were calm because they knew what was coming up and what was going to be prepared that day. And it was about, it's about onboarding them through everything and letting them know this is the expectations. And so that's a huge faux pas to spring that on a child, of course, like that. I've got to
Yeah,
manage that very carefully. Nobody, regardless of age, regardless of how they like to learn, or how their brain functions, likes something to be sprung on them last minute. No one likes that.
yeah,
People like to be prepared in their mind with their nervous system needs to be recalibrated. Okay, I'm going to do this thing. And to spring there. But I want you reminded me of a story. I had a boy in my class, and we were learning about ancient Rome. Okay, and this is beautiful. I love this story. So, learning about ancient Rome, they came to a lesson with me, and I was talking about the two brothers who ran Rome, and their conflict that they had together, and their history, and I'm trying to inspire them with the beginning of with Rome, Romulus and Remus, and all this stuff. Anyway, really interesting. We had a really nice lesson. Then I said to the children, look, you can go away now. And on Friday, your objective is this. You've got a week. In your free time this week, and we had free periods in my primary school, in your free time this week, you have to produce something based on Rome. You can choose what it is. You can choose what part of Rome, what time. You can choose, I don't mind what you create, but there's one objective, and that is that you have to use the thing you make on Friday to teach somebody else. Could be your mum, could be your dad, could be your granddad, could be a kindergarten kid, could be me, could be kids in this class. You have to teach somebody else about something about Rome that they probably didn't know. So this little boy, he decided that he was going to make the Colosseum. He was going to make a version of the Colosseum that was about a meter wide. And he came to me for advice on how to build it. And so he built this structure out of lollipop sticks or popsicle sticks, like a scaffold. And
yeah,
then it took him, 2 days. He was working on it solid, putting the sticks together, gluing them, taping it all. He had this beautiful cylindrical scaffold that looked like the Colosseum. It was really gorgeous. His next plan was to cover it with papier-mâché, which is, for anyone listening, is newspaper and glue and water like a paste. And then he was going to paint it, and he was going to teach the kindergarten children to do a little reenactment with some little models he had about what would happen inside the Colosseum. And I thought, wow, what an amazing objective, to have. But he went wrong, and he went wrong like this. It came to putting the papier-mâché on the model, and he came to me and said, Gavin, how do you make papier-mâché? And I said, look, I've actually made you a laminated card on how to make it. And, I told him it's 2 parts water, 1 part glue, get the newspaper, and I wrote down instructions. And I handed it to him. He said, thank you. And he went away to his Colosseum, and I saw him not read it. I saw him not look at it. He put it on the table. He turned it over. He went and got the PVA glue, and he put like 6 parts glue, 1 part water, right? And he had this thick, what looked like, something like honey or treacle. And now I knew what was going to happen next. Right? I knew that he was going to dip the newspaper in, put the newspaper on the scaffold, and it was going to be too heavy, and the whole thing was going to collapse. I just knew that. I've been a teacher 20 years at this time. And I was sitting there thinking, gosh, this kid has put so much time into this structure. I've just got to go over and tell him, like, brother, I know you're only 8. I know you didn't read instructions, but you're about to make a huge mistake. But I didn't. I sat back, and I was teaching some children about 3-dimensional shapes. I'll never forget. And I watched him make the mixture, put the newspaper, and cover his structure with this really heavy, weighty, liquid, covered newspaper. Anyway, so it came to the end of that was the end of the day, and we were going home. It's like, Gavin, here's what do you think of my project? And I could see it was starting to buckle under the weight of this mixture he'd created. So anyway, I said, let's go home now. We closed the door. We all went home. And when we came in the morning, he was first at school, and he was waiting at the door. He was so excited to come in and paint his Colosseum. But when we opened the door, the whole thing was flat, like a huge omelet, just squashed. And he looked at it, and he was really sad. And he shook his head, and he looked at me. And I said, do you know what went wrong? And he said, I think I put too much glue in the mix. And then he pulled the garbage bin over, and he just got the whole thing, and he pushed it in the bin, the whole thing. And then he went to a table, he sat down. I didn't talk to him for about another, 2 days, and he just built the entire thing again from scratch.
Yeah.
He started again. He started again,
Oh.
and he finished it. By Friday he finished it, and he did his little, he did the show for the kindergarten children. But the lesson, the learning that he got out of making that mistake, the determination, he'll be the kind of guy, I think, he'll go to IKEA, he'll buy a wardrobe, and now he will 100% read the instructions before building it. 100%. Because he learned that lesson when he was 8. He thought, you know what, when someone gives me instructions, I better just read them because they're there to guide me. But more often than not, we don't want the mistake to happen because it's time consuming. It looks bad on us, things going wrong. But in actual fact, we need to just let it happen. As long as the children are safe, as long as they're not going to fall off a cliff, not going to get hurt, let it happen, let it all go wrong. And then have a conversation about it. What do you think went wrong? And they say, I think this went wrong. They have a chance to reflect. And then they start again, or they go again. And I think we miss that point a lot in our schools and our classrooms.
Absolutely. And especially, and it's already, we're so used to also, for instance, when I go to schools, a lot of people say, we do projects. Okay, and what do the kids do to show that they actually understand what they have been learning? They do a presentation on it. Well, they need to build, they need to create, they need to put it into practice, not being the teacher talking about it. You teach based on experience. So please make sure that they don't just present, but that they build and create. At my time at Agora, I was guiding this group of students, 12 to 16-year-olds, and they were all allowed to build their own table or part of the school where they would sit, like their personal office space. They were allowed to build that. But of course, they could also build other things, whatever they wanted. And in the beginning, they would come up to me and they would present what they wanted to build, and they would have to come up with a plan. And then I would actually give them money to go to the shop and buy the construction materials for it. Nice. And I've seen a lot of mistakes happening there. Like they would need like a 2 by 2 meter board, and they would go to the shop on their own by bike. And I would just let them go. Okay, here's the money. And they would go off. And then they would be at the shop and they would grab the materials, and they would go to the register, they would pay, and then they would come outside with their bikes. And then they would ring me. Yeah? They would always have my mobile phone number, and they would ring me and they would say, Rob, can you come over to the shop because this is not going to fit on our bikes? And I would always say, no, do you have, I told you to get a receipt. Yeah. Do you have the receipt? Yes, of course I have the receipt. I said, well, it's the same way back. You go to the register, you give them the receipt, and you can give them all the materials back. Because if you can't transport them, well, you can't work with them, can you? And I can't leave the school constantly to go to the shop. And that was a big lesson, because the first group who did it like that came back at the school with no materials at all. And the other classmates, they were looking at them like, where are the materials? Well, we made these and these mistakes. So I would set them in a circle. What? Oh, yeah, we're all curious. Sit in a circle. Tell the kids what happened. After that, other ones, immediately when they started to build, they started thinking about, okay, how do we get the materials from the shop to the school? Yeah. They would say, okay, we don't use 2 by 2 boards. We're going to buy some other shapes. Or they would ring their grandfathers and ask them to come over to help them with the transportation. So a lot of things happened there. First of all, they thought they were builders, but they were also arranging transport, So that takes a different mindset. They were organizing other people to help them. That also takes another perspective on that same project. And I don't have to arrange all of that. They were doing it themselves. So
that's right.
I remember another.
The educational, you remind me, it's an educationalist called John Dewey. Have you ever heard of John Dewey?
Yeah, of course.
He has one of the greatest quotes, I think, in education ever. And it is, education is not preparation for life. Education is life. Yeah. And so that quote says something really poignant to me. It says that when you are a teacher and you are planning a lesson, that there has to be living inside that lesson. It has to be living. And so, you're like, well, how do I get the kids to live in this lesson? It's very easy. You say to them, You're not doing the work that you're about to undertake for me. I don't care. You're not. It doesn't matter if it impresses me or not. Don't ask me, do you like my work? No, in fact, you can, because we can have a conversation, but it's not for me. This work is not for me. And this work is not for your mum and dad or the fridge or the wall either. It's not for any of those things. It's not for showing off. It's not for saying how good you are. This work is about adding value. And you've got two places you can add value. You can add value to you. So if you want to do this for you, to further your knowledge or become an expert or a master in dinosaurs or butterflies, whatever it is, that's totally valid. Do it for yourself. But you can also add value to the world around you. You can add value to our school, this class, the community,
Yeah.
or the global community. You decide before you start even deciding what you're going to do. Are you going to build a bird box? Are you going to plant a seed? Are you going to, do whatever it is you're about to do? Decide why. Where will the work add value to the world around you? And then they're working intrinsically for the greater good. They're not working to impress. They're not working for a grade or a point or a score. And if you can also add to that to say, I don't mind how you show me your research. It can be a model, a play, a dance, a piece of writing. You decide. They're also finding out what they potentially want to do with the rest of their life in that journey. And so now you've got this beautiful organic work happening where they're adding value to the world around them and they're finding their future profession potentially in your classroom. And that's where mistakes will happen straight away. Because, in that journey of choosing and in that journey of making those decisions, things are going to go wrong. If things go wrong, but this is the whole John Dewey part. This is about living. If you're going to do this piece of work to teach kindergarten or to make your grandma smile or to attract a new bird into the garden, it potentially will go wrong because life goes wrong sometimes. And that's where those mistakes are so important, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's really also a mind shift that we, of course, both of us are promoting amongst teachers and school leaders, that you don't start with the learning goals and then come up with a lesson. What I always like to say is you have options in mind for your kids. You come up with an experience so they can live it, and they will ask you for the lesson. You don't have to come up with a lesson. We can, as we are doing today, we're constantly giving each other lessons or lectures, but that's because we are asking for it. It's the experience that invites us to ask the other person, like, what is your opinion on this, or can you help me with that? And a lot of the times we start education actually with just telling people what to do with, like, the lesson. And we even tell them in advance, like, this is the lesson of today, so stick with it. And without telling them without having the joy of an experience at all. While we all know that what we actually remember is an experience and not a lesson. If people ask me, what do you remember from secondary school? I say the trip to Paris. I don't say the Pythagorean theory in year 3. I don't,
Yeah.
But of course, I know French words because I was in Paris, and I know what the Eiffel Tower is, and I know why it is such an impressive building, and since when it is an impressive building, etc., etc. But that's because we had an experience.
Yeah, of course. And life is an experience. There's no question about that. I think that we have to have this huge shift in terms of what I call the educational intention. So, what is the reason that you are going to do the thing you're about to do? What is the reason why? And as the teacher, if you can't validate why you're about to teach something, then when your children say, why are we learning this? You have no answer. You have to make that up. And if you can't do that, if you can't validate it, if you've got no intention from behind the work you're about to do, you need to recalibrate. You need to pivot. You need to make it intentional. Or your other objective is to hand it over to the students and say, okay, what can we do? We're about to learn these new skills, and I'm wondering, what can we do with these new skills to add value to the world around us? And you get kids coming up with really wonderful ideas. If you're learning measurement, if they're learning measurement in class, and measurements on every It's a fundamental skill in mathematics. You're like, well, why am I learning measurement? And you say, well, you could say, well, when you're older, you'll need to put a
Yeah.
carpet down in your living room and you'll need to measure the living room. And the kid's like,
Yeah.
well, I'm
Wow.
not old. I'm only 7 years old, and I don't care about measuring a
Yeah.
carpet. And so, a nice objective is to say, we're going to learn measurement. It's in the curriculum. I'm going to teach it to you, but I'm just wondering, like, I'll tell you how I use measurement in my daily life, how I use it all the time, measuring time and speed and distance and all these things. Now, listen, you've got objectives of your own, things you want to do, problems you want to solve. I wonder if that before I even start teaching you, you might come up with some ways of using this measurement when we finish, so that you can use it to benefit the world around you. And, I was lucky to work in Costa Rica with Dan Lakis, who used to be the ex-principal of Astronova School, Elon Musk's school. And that was really fascinating to spend a lot of time with him, because, Elon Musk is Elon Musk, and, whatever you think about Elon Musk is completely up to you. But in his school, they do something really, really amazing. So down at Astro School in SpaceX, you say to the kids, all right, guys, so your objective this term, for the whole term, you've got 10 weeks, is there's a ramp right here. And your objective is this car. I'm about to give you a model car. You've got to push it down the ramp, and it's got to go as far as humanly possible. That's your objective. And that's it. And the kids go, right, okay, so, off the kids go, and there's all these lessons entwined. But what happens then is the teachers use the curriculum and align it with this one task. So now they're talking about friction and mathematics and aerodynamics and science and forces, and all of these things play into this one thing. And as the kids upskill during the term, they start to be able to use those skills to get this car to go as far as possible. So you might think, well, yes, Gav, mathematics and science, they directly align with this. How on earth would you align literacy with this? Well, suddenly, if you're teaching literacy and you're teaching persuasive devices or open communication, your kids say, you know what, maybe if I write a really powerful letter to one of the local engineers at SpaceX and ask him to come in and teach us about aerodynamics, and that letter's good enough, he'll turn up here and he'll say, listen, let me tell you how to make this car go further. And so everything funnels in, and the why is kind of organically there already to say, now you know how all of these skills filter down to this one objective.
This remembers me of a great example. I had these students in my previous school, and they were doing a project. They wanted to do a project on the Great Barrier Reef, but being in the Netherlands, of course, that's quite a distance. So they wanted to study it from a distance. And they came up to me, and at that moment, we were in a building with two schools. So I was in there with Agora, and there was another school in there as well. And at Agora, we didn't have, at that point, a certified biology teacher. So they came over to me and they said, Rob, the teachers sent me over to you because you need to get us in touch with the biology teacher of the other school in the building, because we want to ask her questions, because we're working on the Great Barrier Reef. And I said, why do you think she can answer those questions? And they looked at me like, what? These were like 13-year-old, 12, 13-year-old students. And I said, yeah, because I know this person. I've spent break times with her, lunchtime with her, and I never hear her talk about the ocean. I don't even know if she ever left the Netherlands. Why would she be the perfect person to help you guys with a project about something on the other side of the world? I never even heard her talk about fish, and not even talking about a reef, So why? Wow. And they were like, okay, you're making a point. I said, what if you send her 10 questions and ask her to explain them to you tomorrow? What do you think she's going to do tonight? Well, she's probably going to look them up. I said, okay, so what's the added value then? You could have done that yourselves in this time frame. And they said, yeah, okay. So what are you actually saying? And so what should we do? I said, well, if you have real questions that you can't find in, let's say, 2-3 hours, who would you address? Who would you love to ask them? And they would say, an expert. And where is this expert? well, it's probably in Australia because the reef is over there. I said, yes.
Yeah.
So how do you get in touch with an expert?
I know where this is going.
And then they started looking online, finding this expert in Australia.
Yeah.
And I met these three girls 3 days later again, and I passed them in the hallway, and I asked them, "How is your project on the Great Barrier Reef going?" And they said, "Well, we've stopped it, we've paused it." And I was like, "Ooh, that wasn't my idea, you know." I said, "Why?" And they said, "We realized that we need to write the perfect email in English because otherwise this person doesn't take us seriously. So we're working on our English this week."
There you go. Exactly right. That
Done.
is, I mean, yeah,
And they got in
it's
contact. They
amazing.
got this. They got this professor, and he allowed them to have 3 or 4 online sessions with them to answer all their questions.
Yeah,
But it
amazing.
was because the email they've sent stood out. You
Yeah,
know, it wasn't like, "Can you tell us? I'm 12. Can you tell us something about the Great Barrier Reef?" Their passion was in there. Their higher
yeah,
level questions were in there. You know,
yeah.
and this
Of
professor
course.
was sold. He was like, "My kids don't ask me questions about the reef when I get home, and now I have these 3 girls who want to know everything about it. Let's help them." You know?
Yeah, so good.
Yeah,
I mean, and that's
yeah,
it. In every journey, there's so many skills at play. You know,
yeah,
just think about us operating as human beings. You need to be a good observer, have good communication skills, you know, confidence, resilience, determination, persistence. There's all these things entwined, as well as the curriculum. There's a mathematics, a history, the science. You know, all these things play a part in making this omelet with multiple
yeah,
flavors.
yeah,
And you know, you can have egg and you can have cheese, and that's great. And that's great, but it's not enough. You need to be able
yeah,
to go into this palette and be able to pull out whatever ingredients you want whenever you need it, and you only get it when children embark on these journeys and they make the decisions themselves and they have the realization to say, we don't have the skill we need right now, but we know how to get it. And
yeah,
then when we've got it, we're going to go and apply it. And I think that is the dream. And look, to be frank and maybe sad and blunt and whatever, when you travel around the world as you do, and I do, and you visit schools, it's sad to see that a lot of the time the only objective to do the lesson is because there's a test coming down the
yeah,
street. And you know, and then you know the question is always, well, why? You know, why do I have to do this test? And say, well, look, you get good grades in your test, you get to go to a really good school, a high school. And so, oh wow, and then what? Well, then you'll get to go to a really good uni. Oh, and then what? Then
yeah,
you'll get a really good job. And then what? Well, the job will pay you a lot of money. And then what? Well, then you can buy things like a house and a Maserati and a Hermes handbag. And then what? Well, then it's time to retire and you're 65. Then what? Then you're going to regret that entire journey you've just had. And you've just wasted your entire life doing something you didn't want to do to get to this materialistic lifestyle. Whereas, if at the very beginning of that journey, it's tell me why you're about to do this thing and you can show me your work however you want, to say, all right, so I'm not doing it for points and scores, percentages and grades so I can get to a good school and buy a Hermes handbag. I'm doing it for some kind of value to the world and I get to choose how. Then the dream is that you have these wonderful citizens who do good for the sake of doing good, but they also are on a mission and it's something that they chose and they're already a master by the time they leave secondary school, so they don't waste any time. And you know, in that journey too, all of the academics we want, they come organically because our kids are so passionate. They're so passionate about the work they're doing that they learn how to write, they learn how to read, they learn about mathematics because they have to in order to pull off this crazy project that they've chosen.
yeah.
And you know, that's what deep learning looks like.
And actually, Gavin, you're touching upon, like, for me, one of the first tips I give educators and teachers when they ask me, "Rob, how can I build in that flexibility? How can I build in allowing them to iterate? Because it's not a mistake; it's an iteration. You build something, you see the result, and you rethink, reflect with other people, and do it again.
Yeah,
Um, how can I do that?" And I'm always like, okay, first of all, don't finish with a test. Then most teachers
yeah,
say, okay, I'll make them do a presentation. No, please don't. Ask them what you were just saying. Ask them, how are you going to show me at the end? what you've learned. How? And when they say a presentation, we say, no, please don't. Build or create something. Write a song, write a poem, build a symbol, build a statue, create something, learn to play an instrument, express yourself in ballet or whatever. But show us that. If you show us that, your audience will ask you questions and you can explain it even deeper. And that has a much higher level of value. For me, it has a higher value than doing a presentation. And
yeah. Although, not to rebut you, but maybe there's a kid who wants to be a keynote speaker when he's older, and
definitely no problem at all.
and he wants to do a presentation. But I get it. You can't do a
Yeah,
presentation every time because it's the standard.
exactly. I want to get rid of this standard. A presentation is just one out of the 150 options to express what you've learned.
I agree.
And if we open that up, and then we can, because that's actually what I also wanted to get into with this talk. If we open that up, we as educators have a problem as well, because we don't know everything to build all of those projects or all of those end products. And that means that we have to be flexible as well. We have to tell these kids, listen, I've never built a statue. I can't write a song, but I'm there to help you, to find people who can assist you. I'm there to support you along the way. Let's fail on this together. Let's iterate on this together, because that's what we actually do.
Be on their team. Be on their team. They choose it. You know what? You can do that. And I'm right here with you to do it. I'd love to see you do that. I have no idea how to pull that off.
Yeah. And we're going to pull it off. And I'm going to walk behind you. And when you are, and I'm going to make sure that you are in your stretch zone, not your comfort zone. That's repetition. Not your panic zone, because that's ugly. No learning there. Only scars happen there. I'm going to make sure that you stay in your stretch zone, and we're going to work on that together. And for that, I'm going to follow you, and I'm going to be, and that's what I really see, because of all the pressure that a lot of teachers put on themselves. I don't see them observe a lot, and you should be observing. And the only thing that you need to observe is he in his comfort, stretch, or panic zone? And when they're in that panic zone, you immediately have to do something. And in the other two zones, you can think about it. Yes. Take your time, analyze the problem, go back to what the real problem is, not to what you see at the moment, but go back to the real problem and try to help the student with that. And that's where the real growth happens. And I think that should be the role of that should be a role that teachers need to embrace more. And for that, they have to facilitate the kids to walk in front of them, because otherwise they can't make those observations. If you're constantly, like me now, if you're talking for full 5 minutes to somebody, you don't even find the time to observe how are they getting along with this, or are they following us, or are they in front of us? Yeah. So I think that's very important.
You know, I had going back to that, I think a very simple way to have this, you know, any teacher who's coming saying, look, I just can't do this stuff. Like, I have a mandate in my school. I have a curriculum. I have set timetable. I have tests I've got to do. And, you know, that's fine. There's no problem with that. But you can work within those guidelines.
Exactly.
And you can work within the limitations. And it doesn't need to be, you know, I have this chart that I made, and it's 100 ways to, you might have seen it on LinkedIn, 100 ways to show me that you've learned what we're supposed to learn in this lesson. You can choose. But not everybody has all of those resources. Not everyone has all of them.
Yeah.
So going back to the statement around freedom within limits, we know that when there's risk involved, then there's deep learning takes place. 100%. Risk equals I've got to make decisions, and therefore, I know this is going into the hippocampus. So maybe you're a teacher who only has paper and pencils in their classroom, right? That's it. Paper and colored pencils. They're quite standard. So you sit down and you're like, I'm going to teach the children about snails. That is in the curriculum today, right? So I'm going to do this inspirational lesson about snails, however the teacher deems to do that. But then comes the options to say, all right, guys, now you've got freedom within limits. Here are 20 ways you can use the paper and the pencils in this room to represent your work on snails. But remember, the intention behind the work you're going to do must add value somewhere. So you're going to decide who to work with. You're going to decide on what you're going to do. Is it going to be a card? Is it going to be a poster? Is it going to be a letter? Is it going to be an infographic? Is it going to be a piece of origami? What is it going to be? But then when it's finished, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it to make sure that someone benefits from this at the end? And so you might get a kid. I mean, just think about this. I love this. Just think about this. So you have the lesson on snails, right? And you tell the kids snails have 17,000 teeth. They go to sleep for 5 years, but they're also in danger in our local area because blah, 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 pesticides and herbicides are killing them. And snails are a pollinator. Like a bee, they pollinate flowers. You eat aubergines because snails exist. And the kid's like, what the hell? That is crazy. And you say, listen, now you get to represent your work in any way you wish. And all you've got is paper and pencils. Off you go. It's got to add value. So one kid decides, my grandma has just lost my grandfather. He's just died. And my grandma's really sad. And snails are actually one of her favorite creatures. I want to make a card for my grandma about snails. I'm going to label the snail with all the different parts and I'll give it to her. And my intention is to make her happy because she's really sad, right? And another kid, a different mind, a different child, a different mindset, says, you know what I'm going to do with that paper? I'm going to write a letter to my father, who actually is a bank manager, one of the biggest banks in, Russia or whatever. And I'm going to ask him to give me $25,000 to plant a forest at the back of our school to attract new ecosystem, and hopefully snails will have a place to survive. Now, both of the children are now learning about snails. No question about that. The curriculum is ticked.
Yep.
But they got to choose. They have intention. And at the end of that, both of them are equal in success. Even if the forest is planted and the grandma smiles, they're both equal because they met their objective. I did it for this reason and I achieved my objective. And I think that is where we can find this beautiful synergy between the resources we have in our rooms and our disparity between demographic and socioeconomic backgrounds, but also still allowing to have the children have freedom within limits because some of us don't have the things that everybody else has.
Yeah, that's a great story, Gavin, and I'll totally agree on this. I know we have a couple of minutes left, and as you know, my company is called All Learners for a reason, because I believe everybody is a learner, aka student or personal developer or however you want to call it. And we've been talking a lot about the relationship between teachers and students. But what I really notice, and what I talk a lot about with the managers and school leaders at the schools that I work with, is that if you want to equip your teachers to work like this, you have to treat them in exactly the same way because they are learning too. And for me, that means that what we are saying about this is how you need to treat your students is actually also how managers and school leaders have to treat their staff. They also have to create the circumstances in which the staff dares to take risk. They have to create the circumstances in which the staff dares to give these opportunities to the students. And those are circumstances in which the staff members feel safe. They feel safe to fail. But what they also need, for me, is that they need to have those organized moments of reflection. Because if you only fail and don't reflect with your peers on it, then it's never going to work. So even I know a lot of school leaders who say, yes, my staff members are allowed to do this, but they don't do it, and I don't understand why. Well, for me, this is one of the reasons why, because they don't organize staff members who can actually observe each other. They don't organize reflection among staff members. And if you don't do that, you're alone, and then you feel failure. But the nice thing about not the nice thing, but the thing about feeling failure is when you have somebody else to observe it, they can help you to turn it into success. And that's that's why observation is important, observation by peers, and reflection with peers is important. If one of those two are missing, and I see that also happening, that they for instance organize reflection with peers, with other teachers, but they haven't seen you operate. So that's not working. They need to have their own observations. and then reflect.
Well,
And
look,
that's the culture I think you need to create in a school.
yeah, well, look, interestingly, the Indian government just brought out a new mandate for the CBSE. I don't know if you know the CBSE
No,
schools, but
not at all.
they're all across India. There's literally tens of thousands of these schools, and it's a curriculum. It's a secondary curriculum, and they've just brought a new mandate out. It just came out a few days ago, which is, they want children to focus on skills, but they also want them to reflect on the skills they've developed, and also they want to have peer-to-peer reflection to say, hey, by the way, how do you think you did on this project? And because when children talk to children, they give a different, more candid,
Absolutely.
their reflection upon what they've done is more candid, it's more honest, it's more open. But also, there's an amazing opportunity to learn and to say, like, it's okay to fail. Look, they went wrong, and it's okay for me to go wrong too now. So I love this, and I love doing all this work in India because I find India is like really at the forefront. They had the NEP 2020, which mandated the SDGs to be in the curriculum, and I love that from the United Nations. And it just rolled out what's called the HPC. I definitely would look at it if I were you. And it's basically this reflection upon learning and the focus on skills. And I just think, we often look at Finland and Sweden and Denmark and Switzerland and go, look at these guys, creme de la creme. But there are really fantastic things happening in countries all around the world. And I don't want to be a plug, but I want to say this to you. This. I just wrote a book, Raising Resilient Children. It came out this week. It's actually a lot of the things that we talk about are in this book. So if any of our listeners today want to go grab a copy, you can read, I think, 40 pages online for free, and then you can do whatever you want. But I just wanted to just I never do this kind of stuff, so I wanted to give myself a shout out.
Well, I actually asked you before we did this, like, should we talk about the book? And you said no. So
but I don't like to focus on that kind of stuff,
No, I know you need to run. I think I have one question last because we talked about end products and the big variation, and I know you have a nice LinkedIn post on it with an overview. So maybe you can connect that in the comments so that people can find it. And we haven't set a next date yet.
Let's just to everyone who's listening, if you are interested in being a guest, we're always looking for guests. If you're interested in coming on, we would love to hear from you. 3 people in this conversation is better than 2. We've got more perspectives, and we'll get bored of each other in the end. Well, maybe we won't. I'm not sure. But if you do want to be here and join us, then we'd love to have you. Just write it in the comments or send us an email. Our emails are on the screen. But Rob, it's been lovely to be with you, brother. Again, I'm sorry it took me so long to get back here.
Yeah, no worries at all. And for everybody who's listening, we'll probably do this again in the upcoming weeks, like not next week, but we at least want to do one a month. But when we have the time, we might do more. So follow us on
one in September, 100%.
Yeah, we are definitely. Okay, Gav, nice to talk to you.
You too, brother, and goodbye, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Goodbye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.